The Horus Heresy, an age of galactic betrayal where brother turns against brother and entire worlds burn in the fires of ambition and heresy. This is the story of one of the many battles that shaped this brutal civil war. Battles of desperation, sacrifice, and treachery. This is the story of a single ship, one built in the shadows to annihilate an entire legion, a secret weapon of the word bearers, and a desperate one-way mission to stop it. What's up, nerds? It's Zach the Goblin here. Warhammer 40k has such an amazingly deep and interesting universe, but it is so deep, in fact, that there is so much lore that you might be stuck on where to even start. A lot of people will want to start with the Horus Heresy, but with over 50 books, it might feel like a daunting task. That is where this series comes in. I will be explaining the plot of each Horus Heresy book in order. This is for people who want to get into the series but don't have the time to invest to reading all the books, people who are jumping around the series and maybe want some added context, or even people who just want a quick refresher. If you enjoy this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe to see more books explained. As always, once this video hits 50 likes, I'll start working on the next one. And before we start, I actually have a quick aside. So this is the 8th video that I've done in the series so far, and I've changed my style around quite a bunch from the beginning till now. And I'm just curious, what do you guys prefer? These longer versions, like the ones I've done recently, or the more condensed versions, like my first couple of videos? Honestly, I think there's pros and cons to both. I'm just curious about what the people who watch these videos prefer. So let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much. Okay, with that out of the way, this is the Horus Heresy Abridged, Book 8, Battle of the Abyss, by Ben Counter. Okay, so first let's start with a little background. So this takes place after the heresy has already started, but word hasn't really spread to the Imperium at large. It's a little confusing because it's supposed to take place after Istvan V, but they mention Horus's upcoming Istvan III campaign, which definitely has already happened by this point. This is because there was a bunch of warp storms at this time, which made communication across the Imperium very hard. So word had just never reached the Ultramarines at this point. So that's why they don't realize yet that the word bearers are traitors. That's the only thing I think that needs to be mentioned before we get started. I just thought it was a little confusing, so I wanted to explain a little bit. As Olympus Mons erupted with fire, the bustling forge world of Mars toiled beneath its shadow. Red-robed adepts, mindless servitors, and Scutari moved tirelessly through its smokestack cities. Amidst this infernal industry, a secret shuttle launched into the crimson skies, bound not for any known destination on Mars, but for the distant reaches of Jupiter. There, hidden beyond its great moons, lay Thule, an unremarkable asteroid turned clandestine shipyard, hollowed out and transformed into a mechanized warren of forged temples and gravity engines. Thule had become the crucible of heresy. It was here the word bearers gathered, led by the fervent and fanatical Zadkiel. "We stand upon the brink of a new era." Zadkiel's voice resonated powerfully in the gargantuan chamber. "A red dawn is rising, and it will drown our enemies in blood. Heed the power of the word, and know it is our destiny." Zadkiel bellowed as he delivered the sermon. Scripture carved into his patrician features and bald skull added unneeded gravitas to his oratory. The congregation roared in affirmation, their voices as one. "We have our lance of vengeance. Let it strike out the heart of Gilliman and his weakling legion. Long have we waited for retribution. Long have we dwelt in the shadow." Zadkiel stepped forward, his iron-hard gaze urging his warriors to greater fervor. "Now is the time," he said, smashing his clenched fist down upon the lectern to punctuate the remark. "Brothers, we are the bearers of the word, the sons of Lorgar. Let the impassioned words of our dark apostles be as poison blades in the hearts of the false emperor's lapdogs. Witness our ascension," he said, turning to face the great arch behind him. A vast ship dominated the view through the hardened plexiglass of the blister dome. Cathedra soared from the ship's ornate hull, their spires groping for the stars like crooked fingers. Twin banks of laser batteries gleamed in dull gunmetal down its broadsides. A single volley would have annihilated the loading bay and everyone in it. Cannon mounts sat idle on angular blocks of metal, filled with viewpoints that hinted at the myriad chambers within. The rapacious bristle of the defensive turrets along the dorsal and ventral spines, and the dark indentations of the torpedo tubes shimmered with violent intent. Finally, sheets of shielding peeled off the prow, revealing a massive figurehead, a book wreathed in flame, wrought from gold and silver. Words of Lorgar's choosing were engraved on the pages in letters many meters high. It was the greatest and largest vessel ever forged, unique in every way and powerful beyond reckoning. Such was the sight of it, like some creature born from the depths of an infinite and ancient ocean. Even Zadkiel fell silent. "Our spear is made ready," Zadkiel said at last, his voice choked with awe. "The furious abyss." In the wake of this, the crowd goes wild, with many shouts of death to the false emperor, and things like that. Zadkiel then turning and smiling at the furious abyss. It had been forged with one deliberate mission in mind, and it would need all of its strength and endurance to achieve it: the annihilation of a legion. But secrecy demanded sacrifice. A drone, rigged for destruction, ignited a cataclysm within Thul's core, obliterating every trace of the shipyard and all who toiled within. Nothing survived. The furious abyss slipped silently into the void, a spear of heresy aimed directly at the heart of the Emperor's realm. We then cut over to Brother Captain Hector of the Ultramarines aboard his warship, the Fist of Macragge. He is training alone in intense focus and reflection. After years of campaigning against a hostile alien force, Hector and his 500 battle brothers are finally returning to Ultramar to reunite with their Legion and Primarch, Rabute Gilliman. They are finally returning to the Calth system. As the Fist of Macragge nears its next waypoint, proximity alarms go off as an enormous unknown warship appears next to them. Hector goes to the view screen and he's like, "This thing is huge!" Even several kilometers from the Fist of Macragge, it was rendered massive in the glow of its laser batteries. Hector then realizing what was happening. The vessel had somehow foiled all of their sensors, even their astropathic warning systems. And even worse, it was firing at them. So without warning, it opens fire. It's devastating the Ultramarines' vessel. Amid all the chaos and destruction, Hector realizes they're screwed. It doesn't really matter, they're doomed. So with his ship crippled and his crew dying around him, he gives a final order. "We are beyond help," he uttered with finality as the Fist of Macragge's systems started failing. "Send a warning." We cut over to the spaceport of Vangelis, which just so happens to be the spaceport that the Fist of Macragge was heading to when it got destroyed. Here we meet Brother Captain Cestus, also of the Ultramarines, kneeling in silent reflection. For over a month, Cestus and his squad had been stranded there after serving as an honor guard, waiting for their ship, the Fist of Macragge, to return them to Ultramar. Word had reached them that the War Master Horus had already departed for the planet of Isstvan III to quell a rebellion against the Imperium, with Cestus being envious of his Legion brothers, the World Eaters, Death Guard, and Emperor's Children, who were en route with the War Master. Though Cestus valued philosophy and culture, he was a warrior at heart, bred for battle and loyal to the Emperor's vision. So this news of the War Master's campaign on Isstvan III only deepened his yearning to return to the front lines. As he meditated on this, his trusted brother Antiges interrupted. "You have no need to genuflect on my account, brother." The voice came from behind Cestus, who was on his feet and facing the intruder in one swift motion. "Antiges," said Cestus, sheathing his short blade at his hip. Normally, Cestus would have rebuked his battle brother for such a disrespectful remark, but he had formed an especially strong bond with Antiges, one that transcended rank. And it was a bond that had served the battle brothers well. Where Cestus was governed by emotion but prone to caution, Antiges was at times choleric and insistent, and less intense than his brother captain. Together, they provided one another with balance. So they make their way towards the docking bay, and along the way, they encountered a terrified remembrancer who is super disheveled. Antiges being like, "What's going on here?" and being kind of aggressive, with Cestus being like, "Hey, calm down, hey." He turns gently to the remembrancer and is like, "Hey, what's going on here? You okay?" The remembrancer, still being scared, is just like, I only wanted to compose a saga of his deeds when a madness took him," he blathered. "He is a savage, I tell you." Cestus and Antiges give each other a look and are like, "What are you talking about?" with the remembrancer pointing a quivering finger towards the arched entrance of a muster hall. A stylized rendering of a lupine head was etched into a stone panel beside it. Cestus frowned because he knew exactly who was in there now. The Sons of Russ. Antiges groaned inwardly. "Oh, Gilliman, give us strength." So when Cestus and Antiges entered, they were met with a scene of chaos and carnage. Inside, the boisterous Wolfguard Brimgar Sterndreng was deep in a drunken brawl, tossing his younger Bloodclaw brethren around the hall like toys, all while mocking their strength and roaring with laughter. He even jeered that one of them hit like you're from Macragge, a jibe clearly aimed at the Ultramarines. "Is that so?" Cestus asked sternly from the entryway, Bringar swinging his gaze in the direction of the speaker. His one good eye brightened at once. "A fresh challenge," he cried, swigging from his tankard. "Come forth," Bringar said, beckoning. "I think you've had enough." "Then let us see," the Wolfguard giving a feral grin. "Tell me this," he added, stalking forward. "Can you catch?" Cestus hurled himself aside at the last moment, dodging a flying chair that smashed into splinters against the wall behind him. When he looked up again, he saw a broad and burly Wolfguard coming towards him. Drenched in wolf's mead and wearing the savage trappings of his legion, Bringar launched into a brawl with Cestus, turning the hall into a battleground of fists and overturned furniture. Though the Wolfguard was fierce, Cestus drew on the disciplined combat techniques of his legion and Primarch, eventually overpowering his old friend and burying him beneath a pile of barrels. "Had enough?" Cestus asked through heaving breaths. Bringar looked up at the victorious Ultramarine and smiled, showing his fangs. "There are worse ways to lose a fight," he said, wringing out his beard and supping the wolf's mead squeezed from it. Antiges then approached as Cestus helped Bringar to his feet. So they all have a reunion, with Antiges noting the chaos left behind in the hall. Cestus and Antiges informing Bringar that they're leaving soon and returning to Ultramar, with Bringar insisting on escorting them to the space dock, leaving behind a room full of battered Bloodclaws, who, in his words, had enough excitement. So they make their way to the dock, and they find that Saphrax, the standard bearer for the Ultramarines' honor guard, was already there. So they greet him, saying, "Hey, what's up? You know Bringar of the Space Wolves. Do you have any news for us?" Cestus often mused that none in the Legion were as straight-backed as Saphrax, so much so that he seemed permanently at attention. Dependable and solid, he was seldom given to great emotion and wore a stern expression, like a mask over chiseled stone features. Pragmatic, even melancholic, he was the third element to the balance that existed between Cestus and Antiges. Even so, though, at this moment he was particularly dour, informing them that they had received an astropathic message. So they go to see what the message is about, but find out that they've only received fragments of a meaning so far. Only part of the message has reached them. The nature of the message was broken, more like a psychic cry delivered with extreme force. Saphrax noting that they had yet to receive word from the Fist of Macragge. Cestus saying, "Well, let's not jump to any conclusions. We must believe that," but he was cut off as the three astropaths slave to the control hub began convulsing as the full force of the psychic scream made its presence felt. Chaos erupts as every emergency alarm blares at once. Cestus takes command amid the storm of failing equipment and flickering lights, determined to prevent a catastrophic reactor meltdown that threatens to annihilate the entire dock. They rush into the irradiated heart of the station, navigating collapsing tunnels and sparking corridors to reach the reactor, only to find it wildly unstable, on the verge of implosion. With only seconds to spare, they prepare to destroy it using a bunch of explosives, but before they can act, the reactor collapses in on itself, transforming into a pulsing sphere of warp energy. In a blinding flash, Cestus sees a vision, an image of Macragge, before the energy dies and danger passes. Back in the control hub, fragments of the astropathic message reveal cryptic images: a steel-laureled fist, a golden book, a starship's hull, and distant stars. But Cestus knows what he saw, and the message is clear to him alone. He knew what he had felt. A sense of belonging, like coming home. "Macragge," he whispered, and felt suddenly cold. Elsewhere, on the furious abyss, Captain Zadkiel sits upon his towering command throne, where three warriors and true devotees of the word stood before him. The first was the brutal enforcer Bolanos. He was the tallest of the three, and had a voice like crushed gravel. One of his eyes was blood red, surrounded by a snarl of scar tissue. Even without the injury, his granite slab of a face would have made him a figure of fear, even among his fellow word-bearers. He was the assault captain and Zadkiel's private terror weapon. A potent warrior, Bolanos lacked imagination, which of course made him the perfect follower in Zadkiel's eyes. He was obedient, deadly, and fiercely loyal, all fine qualities in an underling. Next, we had Icthalon, the company chaplain, demagogue and expert torturer. And lastly, there was Reskiel. He was young compared to the other Astartes on the command dais, gaunt of face with a keening hunger in his black eyes, a strange quirk of his birth. He was a veteran of many battles despite his age, and he wore the newly fashioned studded armor of his legion proudly, keen to baptize it with the scars of war. He was widely regarded as Zadkiel's second, if not in an official capacity, because that honor fell to Balanos. But Raskiel made it his business to know all of the happenings aboard the Furious Abyss and report them to his master. Where Balanos was the dutiful lapdog, Reskiel was the eager sycophant. As the bridge pulsed with power and data, news arrives confirming the destruction of the loyalist vessel Fista Macragge. Though a faint distress call may have escaped, Zadkiel though brushes this off, confident that the Furious Abyss is unstoppable in its holy mission. This warship, a monster born in secret and blessed by the dark word of Lorgar, is destined to breach even Macragge's defenses and deliver its apocalyptic blow. It cuts forward in time back to Captain Cestus, who is convening a war council to address the mysterious destruction of the Fista Macragge. Only a few allies responded to his urgent call. Antigues noting that this is kind of a low turnout, with Cestus saying, well, with such short notice, I actually expected less. They were joined by representatives from 3 legions. Of course, their buddy, the space wolf Bringar, another of the gathered representatives, responds to the Ultramarines' greetings. All is well, said a bald-headed Astartes with richly tanned skin, but we beseech you to illuminate us to your plight. His voice was deep and powerful. This was the Thousand Suns fleet captain Motep. Darkly handsome, bereft of the usual battle scars and functional facial bionics wrought by years of unrelenting warfare, this Motep had a curious, aloof air. His shining eyes seemed to bore into Cestus's very soul. But not everyone there was so respectful of his obvious power. The great wolf values silence over idle chatter, so that he might heed wise words, otherwise lost in this needless interrogation, snarled Bringar, the animosity he felt towards the son of Magnus obvious. Bringar was already pledged to Cestus's cause, and together with Antigues had actually summoned the legions on the station to this meeting, but didn't want to include the Thousand Sons. The conflicting character of the 2 legions did not lend itself well to a working partnership, but Cestus had reasoned that they needed every soul, and Motep had answered the call. And even beyond that, he had his own ship, so they kind of needed him. Motep, for his part, just ignored Bringar's thinly veiled insult, motioning for Cestus to proceed. So Cestus lays out the situation, even confiding his fears that some unknown enemy had destroyed the ship. But he did not mention his experience in the reactor core and his visions. Perhaps this deed was committed by an alien ship, or Hulks have been fought and crushed by my legion as far as the Segmentum Solar. The 3rd Legion representative at the meeting spoke up. Skrull was a world eater. He wore battered Mark V power armor, rendered in chipped blue and white, the colors of his legion. The armor was heavily dented in several places, sporting numerous replacement parts, and the battlefield repair work was obvious. The helmet rested on the table next to the warrior. It was similarly adorned and bore a fearsome aspect of blade and ballistic damage that revealed bare, gray metal beneath. Skrull's face was the mirror of his armor, cross-hatching scar tissue, a mapwork of pain and suffering. A thick vein across his forehead throbbed as he spoke. His bellicose demeanor, coupled with a nervous tick beneath his right eye, gave him the outward appearance of being unhinged. With Cestus agreeing, yeah, that's possible, but what is certain is that a ship of the Emperor's Astartes has been attacked by enemies unknown and for some nefarious purpose. This act cannot go unreckoned. Then what would you have us do, noble son of Gilliman? Asked Motep, ever the epitome of calm. Cestus saying that he thinks the attacker was heading towards Calth, because that's where the Fista Macragge was heading. With Motep saying, well, that's kind of a leap of logic. Cestus saying he can't believe a ship carrying 5 companies of Ultramarines en route to Calth was destroyed by some random act of Xenos contrition? Skrull butting in, how are they to even find the vessel? It must be long gone by now. Cestus sighing in agitation, just wishing he could show his brothers what he saw and what was in his heart. It doesn't seem like he's going to be able to convince them, so Cestus humbles himself and kneels, asking for aid. And one by one, the other warriors pledge their support. "The sons of Rust do not refuse an honor debt," said Bringar, getting to his feet and laying Felltooth upon the table. "I will join you in this endeavor." Skrull stood next and set his chain axe with the Space Wolf's rune blade. "The fury of the World Eaters is at your side. What say you, son of Magnus?" Bringar growled, his savage gaze falling upon Motep. For a moment, the Thousand Sons sat in calm reflection, considering his answer. He laid his ornate scimitar with the other weapons. "My ship and I are at your disposal, Ultramarine." "Ugh, this council's greatest opponent. I should like to know why," said Bringar. Motep smirked with amusement at the Space Wolf's rancor, but refused to be baited. "You all know the events at Nikeah concerning my Primarch and Legion, and the sanctions placed upon us that day," the Thousand Sons said plainly. "I am keen to foster improved relations with my fellow legions, and where better to start than the vaunted sons of Rebute Gilliman." Next, we are introduced to the Saturnine Fleet, an ancient and proud naval force that predates even the Great Crusade, known for its unmatched navigational skills through Saturn's treacherous rings. One of its finest vessels, the Wrathful, is pressed into service under the command of Captain Cestus. The ship's captain, Admiral Kaminska, is not very happy about this. Tensions simmer between Kaminska and Cestus as she resents being commandeered for what seems like a mission based on gut instinct. Nevertheless, she leads her fleet into the void alongside another ship, the Boundless, Motep's ship, the Waning Moon, and 4 escorts. So they travel to the coordinates of the missing Fistama Crag, but they find no wreckage, only a fading energy trail. But that trail tells a story. A massive ship has passed through, its plasma wake immense. Kaminska, determined and wary, orders her fleet to follow the trail. Whatever lies ahead, they intend to find it. In a dim, cathedral-like chamber aboard the Furious Abyss, Zadkiel preaches to a gathering of crimson-armored novices, declaring that brotherhood is power. As he delivers his sermon, he ties devotion to their Primarch Lorgar with the inevitability of war against the Emperor, who, he claims, has denied faith and created a soulless empire. After his sermon, he is approached by a bold novice, Ultis. He wishes to talk about the lessons and be illuminated. They have a discussion about the nature of brotherhood, hate, and the true path to victory, the manipulation and division of the Emperor's own sons, the Primarchs. Zadkiel has a little bit of annoyance at this precocious yet insightful youth. He sees promise and danger in Ultis's fervor, deciding to use him as a weapon against Gilliman, whose rejection of religion makes him, in Zadkiel's eyes, vulnerable. Ultis goes away and Zadkiel turns back to his pulpit. As the shadow of approaching loyalist vessels loom, he lights a candle there for the soul of Rebute Gilliman. Blind he might be, but he was a brother of sorts, and it was only right that his future death be commemorated. Later on, aboard the Wrathful, 2 World Eaters engage in a savage duel. Watching from above, Cestus and his brothers, Antilles and Thestor, express deep unease over the presence of the World Eaters, questioning their role in the mission and their violent methods. Cestus, however, defends the necessity of unity, warning that pride and division will destroy the brotherhood of the legions. Yet, even he cannot ignore the World Eaters' notorious past or the lingering tension their presence causes. As the duel rages, Cestus reflects on his grim visions, a mysterious image of Macragge in a reactor flare, filling him with dread. Before the ominous implications can be explored further, Saphrax arrives with urgent news. The fleet has made visual contact with a vessel from the site where the Fistama Crag was destroyed, so they all gather on the bridge of the Wrathful and are stunned to discover a colossal wordbearer ship looming in the void. "Hey, that's a big boy there." The ship also bearing a massive golden book at its prow, echoing the vision Cestus received earlier. Tension quickly mounts as the ship refuses to respond to repeated hails, igniting fears that something is deeply wrong. Despite Admiral Kaminska's skepticism and the crew's unease, Cestus holds off on attacking, determined to avoid open conflict without cause. Even Bringar urges caution. As a show of good faith, a single frigate, the Fearless, is sent forward to investigate, followed by Motep's waning moon. Though Cestus warns both commanders to keep their distance, on edge and haunted by the vision of Macragge consumed by despair, Cestus tries to suppress his growing dread. Cestus would have his answers soon enough. The Fearless had reached its destination. Aboard the Furious Abyss, Zadkiel revels in the overwhelming power at his command, observing the slow approach of the Fearless and the Waning Moon. Zadkiel then establishes a secure, private channel to the Waning Moon to parley with Motep. The exchange quickly turns confrontational. Motep demands answers about the fate of the Fist of Macragge, while Zadkiel evades and cryptically speaks of a coming reckoning and divided loyalties. When he references the Council of Nicaea, he strikes a nerve, suggesting alliance between their legions through mutual grievance. But Motep is unmoved. With grim determination, he announces that he will board the Furious Abyss. Zadkiel, with cold finality, orders the attack. Torpedoes streak into the void, laser batteries fire, and in an instant, the Fearless is annihilated, broken apart in a bright and silent flurry of blossoming explosions. Cestus watches this unfold in stunned disbelief. Motep scrambles his crew into evasive action, but the torpedoes from the Furious Abyss are already inbound. Despite defensive measures, multiple warheads slam into the cruiser, some bursting prematurely, others striking with devastating effect. Motep opens a channel to Cestus, confirming the grim truth. The word bearers have turned against their fellow Astartes. So Cestus is like, oh shit, it's full engagement time. Admiral Kaminska and her fleet spring into action with calm precision, readying weapons and coordinating a counterattack. Cestus is kind of going through it right now. Earlier, he was preaching unity and brotherhood among the legions, but now he finds himself in a battle against those very ideals. Rage and betrayal fuel his command. The Furious Abyss must be destroyed. Meanwhile, Bringar reacts with barely restrained fury, demanding blood and pledging to lead his warriors in a brutal boarding assault. His barely contained savagery unsettles Cestus a little bit, who fears the implications of Astartes turning on Astartes. As the battle unfolds, the Waning Moon attempts to shield itself from a second torpedo volley. Though some miss, several strike true, but these are no ordinary munitions. Within them are smaller drilling missiles that bore deep into the ship and detonate, devastating the gun decks in a hellish explosion of fire and shrapnel. On the bridge, Motep clings to control amidst chaos, issuing orders as his officers scramble to assess the catastrophic damage. The bridge flickers with failing power, and the ship's systems struggle under the weight of the assault. Motep grimly reports their condition to Cestus, yet refuses to retreat. Motep, undeterred, orders a bold maneuver, bringing the ship across the enemy's bow for a full rolling broadside. Explosive rounds slam into the traitor vessel's hull, carving deep craters into the Furious Abyss. While this is happening, the traitor bridge remains eerily calm. Zadkiel refuses to react in haste, insisting they wait and trust in the word, even as the enemy closes in from all directions. His officers question him, but he's like, what's the worst that can happen? We got this invulnerable ship. They can't even touch us. No worries. Meanwhile, assault craft from the Boundless streak through the debris-choked void, joining into the battle. But they might not be as helpful as the Loyalists are hoping for, because a lot of these happen to have sleeper agents aboard them. On one of them, the traitor officer executes her pilot and co-pilot mid-run, calmly stating, "It is written," before continuing her sabotage. So aboard the Boundless, confusion is erupting as fighter controllers begin losing contact with their wings. Distorted transmissions report madness, betrayal, and gunfire aboard the small craft. Elite squadrons are falling apart without the enemy even engaging them directly. Raving voices, screams, and cryptic proclamations over the Vox reveal the horrifying truth. A psychic attack is unraveling their forces from within. Chaplain Ichthalon reports to Zadkiel that their supplicants have successfully sabotaged the fighter assault from within. The pathetic assault was in ruins. Zadkiel praises Ichthalon and calmly prepares the next phase, letting the enemy escorts draw close before unleashing their true weapon. As the last of the attack craft spiral out of control or explode, Zadkiel mocks the futile resistance. The Loyalist fighter assault has collapsed, nearly all of the assault pilots turned on each other mid-mission. Admiral Kaminska and Cestus quickly adapt, ordering the remaining escort ships to press the attack. They dash in close, hammering the Furious Abyss with pinpoint lance strikes, destroying turrets and tearing into hull plating. Their speed and ferocity offer hope, but then the trap is sprung. The immense book-shaped figurehead at the prow of the Furious Abyss cracks open to reveal a superweapon, a massive plasma-based prow cannon. Glowing with terrifying energy, the weapon discharges a searing beam that carves through space, slamming into the waning moon. The strike cruiser is devastated, its aft third obliterated in an instant, reduced to debris and vapor. The true scale of the Word-Bearer's power begins to unfold. The Furious Abyss is no ordinary ship, it is a temple of destruction. Inside the dying waning moon, Motep makes a desperate escape through the wreckage. The ship collapses around him, fires rage, decks split apart, and crew are sucked into the void. His power armor shields him, but nothing can save the thousands of mortal souls aboard. Motep battles through the carnage to retrieve a mysterious wand stave from his sanctum. When Motep turned about to head to the savior pods, he saw a figure crushed beneath the fallen cryglass cabinet. Shards of glass speared the figure's robed body, and vital fluids trickled from its bloodless lips. "Sire!" gasped Calamar, using what little oxygen remained in the chamber. Motep went to the aging serf and knelt beside him. "For the glory of Magnus," Calamar breathed when his lord was close. Motep nodded. "You have served your master and this vessel well, old friend," the Astartes intoned and stood up again. "But your tenure is at an end." "Spare my suffering, lord." "I will," Motep replied, mustering what little compassion existed in his cold, methodical nature, and, drawing his bolt pistol, he shot Calamar through the head. Motep later reaching the savior pods, escaping the doomed vessel. Guided by a prophetic vision, he knew his fate lay elsewhere, aboard the Wrathful. Outside, the Furious Abyss unleashed swarms of crimson-winged fighters, pouring from hidden launch bays. These deadly craft overwhelming the escort frigates. Only the Fireblade escaped, bloodied and fleeing. Cestus and Kaminska watched in horror as their allies vanished from the tactical display. The ship's astropath revealed something far worse though. The Astronomicon, the psychic beacon of the Imperium, had vanished. Cut off and outmatched, the decision weighed heavy. Flee to Terra to warn the Emperor, or pursue the Furious Abyss and protect Macragge. Cestus, believing this enemy ship to be just the beginning of a greater threat, chose to stand firm. Then, like a predator delivering the killing blow, the Furious Abyss drew close and fired its plasma lance, a beam of pure energy that split the Boundless apart at its core. With a final cataclysmic explosion, the proud Imperial cruiser was obliterated. From the bridge of the Furious Abyss, Zadkiel watched the carnage with cold satisfaction, declaring glory for Lorgar as the last two enemy ships fled. Confident they were too late to warn Terra, Zadkiel ordered his vessel into the warp. The Wrathful powered down and retreated into shadow to simulate withdrawal, and the bridge fell into a grim silence. Kaminska and Cestus stood in solemn shock at the destruction of the waning moon. But it was all good because the savior pod was detected escaping the doomed vessel, which just so happened to have Motep aboard. As the crews prepared to receive him, Cestus recalled his fellow Astartes captains, Bringar and Skrull. Cestus then declaring that they would pursue the traitorous Furious Abyss into the warp, despite the heavy losses and daunting odds. Saphrax questioned the wisdom of the chase, but Bringar and Skrull, filled with battle lust, rallied behind the cause. Kaminska, though wary and grieving, affirmed her resolve to see this mission through, so they then charge ahead, following the Furious Abyss into the warp. But the Furious Abyss deployed a monstrous weapon, a psionic mine carrying tortured, dying psychers. As their final death screams erupted, the mine detonated, unleashing a psychic shockwave that destabilized the warp itself. Reality buckled, leaving the Loyalists barreling into a deadly, unpredictable storm. In one of the Wrathful's conference rooms, Cestus, Antiges, and the other Astartes captains are gathered, figuring out what their next steps are. "As soon as we leave the warp, we get into their wake and launch boarding torpedoes at their blind side. Let the fury of the wolf gut this prey from within," snarled Bringar. "They would shoot our torpedoes down before they even reached their shields," countered Motep. "And should they not?" he added before the Wolf Guard could protest. "We do not know what kind of armor they have or what forces are on board. No, we must be patient and wait until the furious abyss is vulnerable." At this point, the debate had been raging for over an hour. "Bah! Typical sons of Magnus, to advise caution in the face of action," bellowed the Space Wolf, his feelings for the Thousand Sun as direct and pointed as his demeanor. "I agree with the wolf," said Skrull. "I cannot abide waiting in the dark. If we are to sacrifice our lives to ensure the destruction of our enemies, then so be it." "Aye," Bringar agreed, making the most of his support. "Any other course smacks of cowardice." Cestus finally breaking it apart. "Okay, this isn't getting us anywhere. We have to find a way to disable the ship. We need to attack it when it's vulnerable. So for now, we follow the ship and await our opening." "Still sounds like cowardice to me," grumbled Bringar, taking his seat at last and slouching back in it. Cestus got to his feet quickly, fixing the Space Wolf with a steely gaze. "Do not dishonor me or your legion further," he warned. The Wolf Guard matched the Ultramarine's hard stare, but nodded, grumbling his assent beneath his breath. Suddenly, warning klaxons howled. Motep gazed into the reflective sheen of the conference table before looking up at Cestus. "Our passage through the Imperium has been compromised," he told him. Cestus meets up with Kaminska, who remains cold towards him, still resentful of how he took control of her ship. That being said, she still understands the gravity of their mission. Cestus puts duty above protocol, even if it does bruise her ego. The chief navigator reveals that the traitor's ship's mine collapsed their warp transit route, leaving them adrift in dangerous, unstable space. Now they must rely on the furious abyss itself as a reference point, shadowing it through the warp's treacherous currents. And not only that, warp creatures are following the enemy vessel, increasing the turmoil further. Kaminska and Cestus head back to the bridge. They had been walking for several minutes before the Ultramarine broke the charged silence. "Your attitude towards me and this mission has been noted, Admiral." Kaminska breathed deep as if trying to master her emotions and then turned. "You took my ship and usurped my command. How would you feel?" she snapped. "You serve the Emperor, Admiral," Cestus told her in a warning tone. "You'll do well to remember that." "I am no traitor, Captain Cestus," she replied angrily, standing her ground against the massive Astartes despite his obvious bulk and superior height. "I am a loyal servant of the Imperium, but you have ridden roughshod over my authority and my ship for a chase into shadows and probable death. I will lay my life on the altar of victory if I must, but I will not do so meaninglessly and without consideration." Cestus's face was an unreadable mask as he considered the Admiral's words. "You are right, Admiral. You have shown nothing but courage and honor throughout this endeavor, and I have repaid it with ignorance. This is not fitting behavior for a member of the Legion, and I offer my humble apology." Kaminska was taken aback, her expression sketched into a defiant response. At last her face softened, and she exhaled her anger instead. "Thank you, my lord," she said quietly. Cestus bowed slowly to acknowledge the Admiral's gratitude. "I shall meet you on the bridge," said the Astartes, and departed. When Cestus was gone, Kaminska realized that she was shaking, but then the Vox crackling into life got her attention. They had made contact with the Fireblade. The Fireblade had been following in their wake, but due to the warp instability, they haven't been able to make contact yet. Aboard the Fireblade, the Geller field had failed, exposing the captain and his crew to the warp's nightmarish depths. Emotion becomes reality. Love, grief, and hatred manifest as monstrous landscapes, consuming the crew's minds before their bodies are twisted into grotesque puppets of the Empyrean. Aboard the Wrathful, Motep senses a fleeting breach in the Geller field. Something has infiltrated the ship. We cut to an officer patrolling the eerily silent aft decks with his squad. They encounter a mysterious figure wearing the wrong ship's uniform. That one belongs to the Fireblade. Despite multiple warnings, the figure doesn't respond. When confronted, it transforms into a monstrous warp entity and slaughters the team, plunging the ship into chaos. With the Fireblade miraculously reappearing, Kaminska orders it docked, only for the ship to unleash an army of warp-spawned abominations. The Wrathful's deck becomes a slaughterhouse as the possessed crew, now fanged, clawed monsters, butcher their way through the human defenders. A desperate battle erupts. Motep, Bringar, and Skrull somehow meet up despite the chaos. They fight side by side, cutting through the horde. but for every spawn slain, more come forth. Motep had forced his way to the docking portals, and realizing the tide cannot be held, he ordered them to retreat, with much protest from Bringar and Skrull. So they start to seal the doors, but instead of following them, Motep turns around to fight, sealing himself inside to trigger the dock's self-destruct. Confronting the warp entity at its core, Motep wields his psychic might, hurling a spear of pure energy into the abomination's heart. The explosion purges the infestation. Outside, everybody assumes he's dead, right? Obviously, big explosion. Even Bringar's being cool about it. "He made a noble sacrifice," intoned the Space Wolf as he got to his feet. "That almost sounds like respect," Cestus said, his voice tinged with bitterness. "It is," growled Bringar. "He gave his life for this ship, and in doing so saved us all. For that, he will have the eternal gratitude of Russ. I am not so proud to admit that I misjudged him." But then behind them, the blast doors opened. Motep emerged from the scorched ruin of the primary dock, staggering, but very much alive, his body ravaged. "It is not possible," Bringar breathed, taking a step back as if Motep were some apparition from the fireside sages of Fenris. Cestus remarking, "We thought you were dead." Motep removing his helmet, breathing deep of the recycled air. His eyes were black orbs and a riot of purple veins wreathed his face, but was slowly disappearing beneath his skin. "Did I?" gasped the Thousand Sun, helmet clattering to the deck as it fell from nerveless fingers. Then he himself fell to the floor. Antiges then goes off to find the ultramarine apothecary. "He yet lives," Cestus added, noting Motep's fervent breathing. "Aye," Bringar muttered darkly, having overcome his superstition. "And there is but one way that could be so." The Space Wolf's lip curled up in profound distaste. "Sorcery." Aboard the Furious Abyss, Zadkiel studies battle projections in his quarters, calculating the destruction of Macragge with cold precision. The numbers are grim, orbital defenses crippled, the fleet shattered, and the population all but wiped out. His mission is nearly within reach, but first, his ship must dock for urgent repairs after a lucky hit from the Wrathful. Aboard the Wrathful, Bringar is very upset, saying, "I know what I saw. Motep was using sorcery." Even Skrull cutting in, saying, "No man, not even an Astartes, could have faced those hordes and lived." Cestus, ever trying to play the mediator, saying, "We don't know for sure that he used sorcery. We just know that he lived when maybe he shouldn't have." With Bringar crying, "Isn't that proof enough? Let me wring the truth out of him. But then he's interrupted by Motep himself. "You will do what, brother?" Skrull cutting in, "What happened on the dock? I lost 2 Legion brothers to that fight. How were you able to survive?" Motep lying and saying that Favor smiled on him. A fuel line linked to one of the docking ports had come loose from its housing and he was able to ignite it. Then he fought his way to a place where he could shield himself from the blast. "Your silver tongue is fat with lies," Bringar accused him, stepping forward. "The air is thick with the stink of them." Motep turned his stony gaze on the Space Wolf. "I can assure you, son of Russ, whatever odor you are detecting, it is not emanating from me. Perhaps you should seek your answer nearer to your own self." Bringar then throwing himself at Motep, bearing him to the ground. Cestus throwing himself at Bringar to get him off of Motep. Bringar then turning his ire onto Cestus for defending Motep, even though he defies the Emperor's decree at Nicaea. Cestus then confines Motep to his quarters to await questioning at a later date. Later on, Admiral Kaminska calls Cestus to the bridge, informing him that the Furious Abyss has an air leak, and they're going to have to repair it somewhere. And in this area, they only really have one option, so the next steps are obvious. They assault the Abyss while it's docked and making repairs. Cestus wants to lead one of the assault groups himself, but Antiges stops him and demands that Cestus lets him take his place, as Cestus is too important to risk on an assault mission like this. Cestus really doesn't want to agree, but he finally does. On the Furious Abyss, Zadkiel communicates with Corferon, assuring him everything's good, everything's going well, and then discusses more with the novice Altus. And Zadkiel notes that this zealot is hungry for glory. But Zadkiel is starting to not really like this, because ambitious warriors might steal his glory or one day try to overthrow him. So under the guise of giving him an honor, he places Altus in charge of securing the dock, but then later gives Assault Captain Bolanos secret orders to kill him. They had 3 discrete combat formations: Skrull and his Legion warriors, the Blood Bloodclaws, led by Bringar in spite of the Space Wolves' earlier altercation with Cestus, and then a second group of World Eaters led by Antiques. So they're infiltrating the docks. Everything's going according to plan until it doesn't. Antiques and his squad of World Eaters are ambushed. Word bearers on an observation platform, raining death from above with bolters and plasma fire. The World Eaters retaliate with savage fury, carving through crimson armored fanatics who fight with suicidal zeal. Antiques is dragged down beneath the tide of bodies. Meanwhile, Bringar and his Space Wolves face their own gauntlet. Trapped in a kill zone, they blast apart the observation platform with melta-bombs, burying their enemies in molten wreckage. Yet, the cost is high. Bloodclaws fall, but the survivors charge forward, howling for vengeance. Above the carnage, the furious abyss looms like a fortress, its docking bays releasing waves of word-bearers and their frenzied cohorts. Bringar and his Space Wolves fight with feral fury. Bringar duels Bolanos, tearing out the traitor's throat with his teeth before howling in triumph. And afterwards, his squad of Bloodclaws are able to capture Altus. Antiques and Skrull were able to meet up, and they find their way onto the ship and lead a brutal charge through the ship's labyrinthine corridors, cutting down fanatical cohorts and crimson armored Astartes alike. They continue to push deeper, discovering a blasphemous cathedral hidden within its steel heart. The word bearers ambush them, and though Skrull butchers his way through, Antiques falls, shot down by Reskiel, riddled with bolter fire. With his last breath, he urges Skrull onward. Now alone, the World Eater captain becomes a specter in the ship's bowels, hunted by vengeful word-bearers as the furious abyss tears free of the docks, leaving burning wreckage and dead warriors in its wake. The Wrathful limps away from the spaceport, its assault force shattered. Only Bringar and a handful of Bloodclaws return, along with their single prisoner, Altus. The mission to cripple the furious abyss had failed, and the cost was devastating. Antiques and Skrull are lost, leaving Cestus to grapple with grief and the grim reality of their dwindling options. Bringar has set himself to the task of interrogating Altus, but even though his fists are bloodied from hours of brutal interrogation, he cannot break the word-bearer's fanatical resolve. Cestus, realizing that time is running out and Macragge's doom is drawing nearer, he looks at Bringar, who is possibly the most physically intimidating Astartes he had ever known, aside from the glory and majesty of the Primarch, of course. If he, with all of his bulk and feral savagery, could not break the traitor, then who could? But then it was suddenly clear, with Cestus saying there's only one avenue left open to them. We have to release Motep. So he goes to Motep, and Motep already kind of knows what's happening. He's like, so you're here to release me, I'm guessing? And he understands. He's like, yeah, the word bearers, you're not going to be able to torture anything out of them. They're fanatics. Cestus is still conflicted, but Motep assures him that he is as moved by his duty as Cestus himself. And if he is freed, he will fight as hard as any. Motep is then taken to the prisoner to lift the memories directly out of his mind. Motep not liking what he saw when he entered the chamber. Evidence of barbarism was rampant. You are quite tenacious, Motep said. There was a trace of menace in his calm inflection as he approached. What compromise you force us to endure, he whispered to himself, drawing close so that their faces almost touched. Tell me, what secrets do you possess? The response came stuttering through blood-caked lips. I serve only the word. Motep reached for the scarab earring and removed it. He manipulated the small object with his thumb and forefinger and placed it upon his forehead, where it stayed affixed in the shape of a golden eye, the symbol of Magnus. Do not think, he warned, placing his fingers against the prisoner's skull and pressing hard, that you can hide from me. When Motep's fingers penetrated the flesh, the screaming began. While that was happening, the Wrathful was attacked, not by the furious abyss, but from the warp itself. Siren-like predators, nightmares of teeth and eyes, breached the ship's Geller field, possessing crewmen and twisting flesh into abominations. The lance deck becomes a slaughterhouse, Cestus leading the Ultramarines into the fray, but bolters and blades barely slow the creatures. One of his men is torn in half, another is devoured by insectoid spawn bursting from a crewman's corpse. Just as they are cornered, Motep arrives, stumbling in after having broken Altus. Weakened, but ready to fight. He wields his forbidden psychic power, using a golden psychic spear to burn through the warp spawn, banishing them back into the abyss. They had achieved victory. Cestus looked back around at Motep. The Thousand Suns staggered, the crimson light extinguished. "They are gone," he breathed, and fell hard onto the deck. Skrull prowls the labyrinthine depths of the furious abyss. Every corridor whispers with history, every chamber dripping with blasphemy. Shrines to Lorgar, various murals, and trophies of conquest. Even Brazentooth, Angron's own chain axe, was there. Zadkiel taunting him over the Vox, telling him Brazentooth was given to Lorgar as a gift. And there's some back and forth, with Zadkiel continually trying to goad Skrull, mocking the World Eaters as slaves to a tyrant emperor. Skrull smashes his way free, vowing vengeance. Meanwhile, back at the Wrathful, Bringar has had enough. He is pissed, and he's pissed at Cestus's reliance on Motep's sorcery. So he challenges the Ultramarine to a duel. Swords only, first blood. The two warriors clash in a brutal, teeth-rattling brawl, swords screaming, fists flying. Cestus is on the brink of defeat, and is battered but cunning, and is able to land a decisive cut across Bringar's torso. The duel ends with Cestus the winner, but the rift between the legions remains. Bringar then proceeding to drink a bunch of Wolfsmead ale, deep in reflection, haunted by visions of a mythical Wolfen. But then, that same Wolfen was now sitting before him, regarding Bringar with its black eyes. The Wolfen bowed down and picked something up off the floor with its jaws. With a flick of its head, he threw it at Bringar's feet. It was a bolt pistol. Bringar picking it up, reinforcing his grim resolve. And visions of Wolfen in the warp, that's obviously a good thing, right? Definitely not a bad omen or anything. Later on, Motep finally awakens from his coma and reveals a vision. The Wordbearer's true target is Formoska, Macragge's barren second moon, with Cestus being like, "Why? There's nothing there." "On the contrary, Ultramarine," said Motep, "everything is on Formoska." Cestus saying, I still don't get it. Motep lifted his head. His eyes were alight with crimson flame. "Then let me show you," he said as Cestus recoiled, lunging forward to thrust his open palm against the Ultramarine's head. On the furious abyss, Skrull is still sneaking around. He returns to the temple where Antiges had been killed. He finds the Ultramarine's dismembered corpse, missing its head, being prepared for a gruesome ritual by Wordbearer acolytes. Horrified, he watches as Chaplain Icthalon and Sergeant Commander Reskiel examine Antiges' remains, using his organs for divination. Icthalon reveals that Macragge remains unsuspecting of their attack, while Calth's fate is uncertain. But then the chaplain senses Skrull's presence, so the World Eater flees, shaken by what he had just seen. Meanwhile, Cestus experiences a terrifying vision as Motep shares Altus's memories with him. He witnesses the destruction of Formoska, triggering a cataclysmic meteor shower that devastates the planet. He also sees the Furious Abyss carrying a viral torpedo, a weapon capable of exterminating Macragge's population. He then realizes the Wordbearer's true plan, not just to attack, but to conquer and annihilate the Ultramarines. Cestus then comes back to reality and is pissed that Motep invaded his mind. The Thousand Sun insisting that his powers are a weapon for good, but Cestus was stern in the face of Motep's impassioned arguments, saying, "You saved us all on the Lance deck, and you probably did the same when we fought what became of the Fireblade. But your ambition overreaches you, Motep. I have stayed Bringar's hand, but from this point on, you will remain here in isolation. If we are successful and can reach Macragge, you will face trial, and there your fate will be decided. And if you ever invade my mind like that again, I will execute you myself." And then he turns to leave. Motep, frustrated, silently condemns the Ultramarines' narrow-mindedness, knowing far greater horrors loom ahead. Admiral Kaminska and the Wrathful's navigator, Orcatus, are gazing out at the warp-twisted image of Macragge. They have finally made it, and they're yapping to each other about stuff, but then their conversation turns serious when Orcatus points out a new anomaly in the warp, a massive, ominous presence. Initially, they mistook it for a planet, but then he reveals it's likely an entire fleet. They are unsure about the identity, but acknowledge the unsettling possibility that it could be another force of Wordbearers. So we cut to the Furious Abyss, where Zadkiel is getting reamed out by Corferon. He's upset because Zadkiel's preemptive strike on the Ultramarines is well behind schedule. Corferon reminds him that the assault on Calth must not fail, and if they do, the entire war effort could be compromised. Taking everything into consideration, Corferon orders a drastic measure: the activation of the Supplicants. The Supplicants are psychically powerful but deformed and barely human beings kept in stasis chambers. He commands them to be awakened, sacrificing dozens if needed, to unleash a warp storm that will distort space-time and aid Zadkiel's mission. As the librarians begin the ritual, the supplicants stir like nightmares awakening. Back on the Furious Abyss, Zadkiel witnesses the sudden, violent upheaval of the warp, and he's like, "Whoa, what's going on here?" But then he starts to suss it out a little bit and suspects the storm was no accident, but a calculated intervention by Corferon. As he realizes this, he dismisses any concern for the pursuing ship, the Wrathful, and orders his vessel to press onward, leaving their enemies to be consumed by the Tempest. The storm hits the Wrathful, and everything starts to go to shit. "Oh no, this isn't good." Orcadus being like, "No, yeah, we're trapped in the Tempest. We're screwed." Cestus warning that they can't hesitate. They need to follow the Furious Abyss regardless, leaving them no choice but to push through the storm. Meanwhile, Motep in his isolation cell experiences a psychic vision of the Wrathful's destruction, its crew consumed by flames and the warp's hunger. But then the warp nearly overwhelms him with visions of Prospero's fall and the temptation of the Wordbearers. Fighting free, he collapses, drained but certain of the dark forces at work. Okay, so the stage is set for the final assault. So the Wrathful exits the warp and immediately begins its suicide attack. All of this is a diversion so it can deploy its boarding craft. Bringard is aboard one shuttle along with his remaining Bloodclaws, excited for the battle to come. "Do you hear it, lads?" he roared above the din, utterly at ease. "It is the call to combat," he told them proudly. "Those are the arms of Mother Fenris. That's the embrace of war." Bringar and the Bloodclaws howled. Cestus and 3 of the Ultramarines were in another craft, along with multiple other shuttles filled with warriors. As they speed towards the Furious Abyss, they are shot down one by one. One of the shuttles slammed the hole besides the torpedo aperture. The fat metal body crumpled under the impact and split. Broken bodies were cast into the void. They were wearing the blue armor of the Ultramarines. "Saphrax is dead," thought Cestus bitterly. Cestus is able to make it aboard with the 3 remaining Ultramarines, and they immediately start attacking the torpedo deck, attempting to destroy the warheads primed to launch at Formasca. They fight through the deck, encountering heavy resistance. 2 more of the Ultramarines are killed in the struggle, one of his brothers sacrificing his life to plant the melta-bombs. Cestus taking the detonator out of his brother's hands, promising he will be honored. But then his voice trailed away as the air around him suddenly turned cold. For an awful second, he thought that the deck had depressurized and the void would claim them all. With the cold came screaming, 1,000 voices echoing out from inside of Cestus's head. It was not the void reaching into the ship to freeze them solid. It was something far worse. Prickling talons probing his mental defenses like ice blades reminded Cestus of his earlier encounter with Motep aboard the Wrathful. "Psyker!" he hissed with sudden realization. Cestus struggles against the force, but try as he might, he could not keep himself from falling into madness. The last thing he remembered was his fist closing on the detonator and the rush of fire. Cestus is assaulted with visions from his youth, his taskmaster calling him a coward. He is then sent to Macragge's version of hell, the level designated for cowards. Cowards were despised on Macragge, but theirs was a pathetic sin. A sin of failure. Then he was sent to the 7th circle of hell. This one was for rebels. It was a machine, a vast, complex, endless construction of cogs and steel that churned through the 7th circle. Rebels had failed to realize that they were required to be a part of a larger machine, and so the 7th hell was to educate them in their place. Sinners became a part of that machine, bent and stretched into component parts. The machine never left them alone, always twisting them or thrusting a piston through them until they gave up their individuality in the hope of ending the pain. The 7th hell was not just a punishment, it was a lesson, and it would break the pupil's spirit in the telling. Cestus's spine was bent backwards. Spurs of metal were slid in at the wrists, down through the muscle of his arms and into his chest. Metal merged with the back of his skull and snapped it back every few seconds as the teeth of a cog hammered behind him. He hears somebody's name call at him from above, and as he looks up, he sees Antiges. "Antiges, I thought you were lost," Cestus calls out. I am. So are you. Cestus saying, but this is the hell for rebels. We are no rebels. Your duties were on Terra, said Antiques. You took a ship and left your post. You took us all on your mission to Macragge and damned the rest. There was no duty that told you to gather your fleet and abandon Terra. This was your personal crusade, Cestus. This was your rebellion. Cestus then arguing that no, it was my duty to Macragge and to my battle brothers. I needed to do this. Loyalty is what drove me on. Cestus then opens his eyes. He is in the last circle of hell. It was an endless shaft of blackness, reaching up and down for infinity. Hundreds of long, thin blades penetrated the darkened void, hanging down from above and spearing down forever. On these blades were impaled traitors to Macragge. They slid, centimeter by centimeter, down into the black. Cestus stood on a thin spur of rock, reaching from the wall of this circle of hell. He saw the faces of the condemned, locked in internal screams as the blades bit slowly through them. I am not a traitor, Cestus says. Neither are these, said the taskmaster, pointing with his whip towards the damned souls sliding their way into eternity. They think they are. Theirs is a sin more of arrogance than treachery. They thought they really had the capacity to betray their fellow man. But in truth, they are just petty thieves and killers. Unremarkable. This isn't real, Cestus says. I am not dead, and this is not hell. How can you be sure? Asked the taskmaster. He's like, well, there's only one way to tell. And jumps off the ledge into the bottomless pit. He hits the ground, awakening back in the real world. He escaped somehow. He is now the only ultramarine left. We go over to Bringar, who's having a vision of his own. He stalked on all fours amongst the steaming carcasses of the pack. He had rent them apart with tooth and claw, his furred muzzles stained with their blood. They had challenged him, and he had proved that he was dominant. Upon the snowy Fenrisian plain, his feral eyes cast across the silver ocean, so still it was like glass. Another wolf still lived and was stalking him. This one was smaller, but lean and well-muscled. Reddish, brown fur covered his lupine body, and he pawed at the ground with blood-red claws. There is a frantic fight, but Bringar is able to kill the red wolf, snapping the red wolf's neck in his jaws. He howls in victory, but then out of the heavy snowfalls, a black wolf, easily twice his size, appears, sitting on his haunches, watching him calmly. There was no challenge in his posture. Bringar detected no threat in either its tone or manner. It merely watched. Look around you, said the black wolf, and through it spoke the words of man. Bringar the Grey Wolf understood. Look around you, Bringar, said the giant black wolf again. This is not Fenris. Bringar woke from a dream straight into a nightmare. He was surrounded by the bodies of his blood-claw brethren. To his horror, he realized he killed them. He shut his eyes against the horror, willing it to be his fevered imagination. But when Bringar opened them again, he knew it was not. He got unsteadily to his feet. The last thing he remembered was approaching the furious abyss. Their shuttle had been hit, and they'd crashed in a place of darkness. The rest was lost. Meanwhile, aboard the dying Wrathful, Admiral Kaminska prepares to go down with her ship, ordering her bridge crew to go to the escape pods, to which they say, that is an order we cannot follow. If you go down with the ship, so do we. But before the vessel succumbs to destruction, one of the crew is revealed to be possessed by a warp entity, a demon that had been feeding on the crew for weeks. Motep, who has escaped his isolation, confronts the creature, recognizing it as the source of the madness that plagued the ship. The demon fully manifests, and Motep battles it through the wreckage of the Wrathful, enduring grievous wounds as the creature taunts him with visions of Prospero's doom and the Imperium's fall. Like an insect, said the demon. You are harder to kill than your feeble frame suggests. I am an Astartes. I am an avenging angel of the Emperor of mankind, Motep challenged, using the brief respite to marshal his strength. I am Motep, thousand son of Magnus the Red. The wisdom of Ahriman flows within me. The affirmation steeled him, and the power coursed through his body. They continued to clash. Motep ran his spear through its side, while the demon swatted him against the corridor wall with a sweep of its gargantuan claws. Before the Thousand Sun could recover, it seized upon his skull and started to squeeze. Motep could hear the bone cracking inside his head as dark spots flecked his failing vision. Your emperor can plot and cower all he likes. What has the warp to fear from him? He taunted, exerting more pressure. Knowledge, hissed Motep through clenched teeth, is power. Twin beams of light seared from his eyes, burning the demon's face and torso. It recoiled, loosening its grip, and Motep rammed his spear into its neck. Motep is mortally wounded, but he realizes the creature's corporeal form is weakening, so he lures it into a final confrontation before detonating an incendiary grenade inside it, destroying the demon just as the doomed ship plummets towards Formaska. Stumbling through the furious abyss, Bringar finds himself in a vast armory filled with dormant dreadnoughts. He is suddenly attacked by a Mechanica Magos. Bringar kills it, of course, but then is confronted by Belanos, the word-bearer assault captain he thought he had slain before, now entombed in a half-completed dreadnought. He's like, "Goddamn, I thought I already killed you." Round 2. So they have a brutal fight. Bringar is nearly crushed to death, but then out of nowhere, Skrull comes in, helping Bringar finish off Belanos for good. The two then take off, eventually meeting up with Cestus. With the cyclonic torpedo payload already sabotaged by the Melta charges, Cestus declares their only remaining option. They must destroy the furious abyss itself, no matter the cost. Bringar scoffs at Cestus' plan, arguing that a few grenades won't do enough to cripple the massive warship. Cestus then reveals their true objective: overloading the plasma reactor at the ship's core, which would trigger an unstoppable chain reaction. Bringar's upset that Cestus kept this plan secret, and, true to form, accuses him of sorcery, but reluctantly agrees, though he vows their alliance ends once their mission is complete. Elsewhere aboard the Abyss, Zadkiel grows increasingly impatient as delays plague the cyclonic torpedo launch. When his orders to engineering go unanswered, he sends squads to investigate, only to learn that Cestus, Bringar, and Skrull have breached the reactor decks. Enraged, Zadkiel executes his chaplain, Ichthalon, before personally leading the hunt for the intruders. The trio fight through word-bearers to reach the reactor core. Skrull sacrifices himself in a suicidal charge against Zadkiel, buying time for his companions. One round tore through his pauldron, another struck his thigh, a third hit his chest, and he staggered. But the fury was upon him, and nothing would prevent him from spilling the blood of the enemy. All those weeks fleeing like an animal, caged in the depth of the ship like a slave. That would not be his fate. 2 more shots to the chest, and Skrull struck his foes. A word-bearer came at him with a chainsword. The World Eater swatted the blow aside and carved his enemy in 2 across the torso. A second went down, clutching the ruin of his face where Skrull had caved it in. Another lost an arm and screamed as the World Eater booted him off the gantry to his death below. Then Skrull faced the gilded captain, standing stock still before him as if at total ease. Bellowing Angron's name, Skrull launched himself at Zadkiel, preparing to dismember him with his chain axe. The word-bearer captain calmly raised his bolt pistol and shot Skrull through the neck. With a last effort, the World Eater lashed out. Zadkiel screamed in pain as his bolt pistol was cut in 2. 3 of his fingers sheared off with it through the gauntlet. Smiling beneath his battle helm, the World Eater felt his leg collapse beneath him. The spinal cord was abruptly severed, and a terrible, sudden cold engulfed him, as if he had been plunged into ice. Vision fogging, he saw Zadkiel standing above, blood dripping from his severed fingers as he drew a long, thin sword. "I am no slave," Skrull hissed as the last of his vital fluid pumped out of him freely. Bringar and Cestus are able to breach the reactor shielding, Cestus calling for the bandoliers, holding out his hand for the belt of Melta bombs that Bringar carried. "It's a one-way trip," said the old wolf. Cestus stared at Bringar, nonplussed. "Yes, now hand them over." "Not for you," said the wolf guard, and punched the ultramarine hard in the battle helm. Cestus fell, half stunned by the sudden attack, and through his blurring vision, he saw Bringar enter the approach corridor. "Both of us not need die here. Avenge me," he heard the Space Wolf say. "And your legion." Bringar powered through the corridor, waves of radiation washing over him, tearing through multiple layers of shielding. He finally passed the threshold of the reactor core's inner chamber. A blast of intense heat struck him at once, his armor blistering before its fury. Beautiful, he thought as he regarded the glowing reactor mass below. Raw, incandescent energy that boiled and thrashed like a captured thunderhead. Priming the meltabombs around his waist, the Space Wolf closed his eyes and stepped off the platform into the reactor core. The first explosion was like a thunderclap. Storms ravaged the platinum sky as Bringar stood upon the edge of the silver Fenrisian Ocean. The tide was high and the waves crashed against the icebergs, shattering the ice floes with pounding surf. He was dressed in only a loincloth. Out beyond the glowing horizon, there was a keening echo. The great orca was calling to him. Brengar took his spear and dived into the ice-cold waters. Light was rising on the horizon, the storm receding. As he swam, he felt a strange sensation. It felt as if he was going home. The sudden release of explosive power rippled through the main reactor. Secondary explosions tore up from the minor reactors as a terrible chain reaction took hold. As the furious abyss tears itself apart, Zadkiel flees to the shuttle bays. Cestus, determined to avenge his fallen brothers, sets off to hunt him down. Cestus finally corners Zadkiel in a shuttle bay wreathed in fire. The two clash in a vicious duel, their power swords splitting arcs of energy as the ship collapses around them. Zadkiel, fanatical and arrogant, boasts of the warp's dominion and the coming union of realities, until Cestus, fueled by the memory of fallen brothers, gained the will to win. That was what made a mere man into an ultramarine. It was will alone that brought him to his feet, and will alone that made him cut Zadkiel's sword, hand and all, from his wrist as he hefted it, clutching the stump of his arm where Cestus had cleaved it. The word-bearer got to his knees and bowed his head. "It means nothing, ultramarine," he said with finality. "It is the beginning of the end for your kind. Yet we still fight," he said. And with a grunt, Cestus cut off Zadkiel's head. But it was a bittersweet victory, because during the fight, Cestus was mortally wounded. Cestus laughed at the ludicrousness of it all. It had felt like nothing more than a sting of metal, so innocuous, yet so deadly. The world was turning to fire around Cestus as he fell bodily beside Zadkiel. The sound of rending metal told him that the integrity of the shuttle antechamber would not hold for much longer. The furious abyss was all but destroyed, the plan for it to cripple the Legion in tatters. The thought gave Cestus some solace in the moments before he died. As his cooling blood pooled around him, he thought of Macragge and of glory, and was finally at peace. His duty ended at last in death. Thank you so much for staying to the end of the video. I really appreciate it. Again, let me know if you prefer the longer videos in this series or the more compact, shorter versions. Thank you again. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more Warhammer 40k content. And until next time, Goblin out.